Okay, so you say you identified this at the end of June. That you, and I recall the statement that you called up the OLG and you said, why haven't you sent, why are you underfunding from what the grant was? When was that? What was the date there? Was that?
First week of July, we investigated after we did the review of June 30th. That's when we investigated as to why we were not receiving the higher amount that we believed that we would be offered.
So in your policy of openness and transparency, who all knew about this at that time?
I'm going to defer that at this point to Mr. Burden.
Through the chair, this came to light, as Mr. Harrison was saying, in the review of the June statements. And when we contacted OLGC, they basically told us, well, you've made the error. And when we checked the actual documentation, we realized, yes, we had made the error. I informed our former CAO in the first week or so, sorry, the first 2 weeks or so of July. And in meeting with the former CAO, I was also able to report that the PILs, which were going to come in at substantially more than what we expected, approximately $650,000, we realized that at that point in time there would be a wash. In other words, we knew that we weren't going to get the $400,000 that we thought we were going to get, and we are going to get $650,000 that we didn't plan on, so it appeared to be a wash. And it was agreed in discussions with the former CAO that there was no need to approach council at that time.
Wow. First of all, a $400,000 mistake, and there's no need to approach council. I find that beyond belief, personally. Was there anything done to notify the staff that there's a $400,000 error and maybe there should be some watching of the budget? I'm amazed that a couple of weeks ago we haven't given any direction with respect to where we're going. Everybody else in the world is cutting back and having concerns and trying to control budgets, and where are we? We're not doing anything, nor have we given any direction. We have all of these increases that are coming in this year as a result of no direction. You know, if you tell people where you're going and what the problem is, they're usually understanding. But the horse is out of the barn. It's too late. What did you do as far as identifying this problem and letting? You obviously told you made a decision corporately not to tell the council. So what did you do with the staff to try to offset the $400,000?
Through the chair, there were no actions taken to offset the $400,000. The June statements were produced and distributed to all the directors who were asked to review their particular areas of responsibility and to report back to finance. There were no responses of undue concern in the other areas, and so we waited until the end of September. When the September statements were drawn, we realized that other difficulties were starting to emerge. And once again, the third quarter statements were distributed to the staff and were asked to review them with more careful consideration, because we were anticipating that there could be difficulty at the end of the year. Mr. Harrison has more comments on this financial update, and you may want to listen to the rest of his presentation.
Okay. I'm interested in the rest of the presentation, but so what do you anticipate this year? Are we going to have a deficit as a result of this?
Through the chair, Mr. Harrison has more comments, and we'll be able to answer that question.
That's a simple question, yes or no?
The answer is yes. At this point in time, we are expecting that there could be a deficit. We still have a month to go. If there proves to be, with our final adjusting entries sometime in January, early February, that there would be a deficit, then we would need to bring options back to you for the use of reserves to balance that, or to actually cancel some transfers to capital that have not been used in the capital program.
In hindsight, would you not have thought it would be prudent to inform the council of a situation like this?
Chair, once again, when we ran the September statements and gave direction to the directors, they were forthcoming in going through their statements. We ran the statements again in October, and it seemed to confirm our suspicions. I believe soon after the October statements were run, which was sometime early November, there was direction given from the two EDs to each of the directors to stop all unnecessary spending and to ensure that all revenues that could be secured were actually done.
Do you have documentation of that? Emails or whatever where you sent out giving any direction with respect to budgetary matters after September?
Through the chair, we have started senior staff meetings every Wednesday. Some of those meetings are strictly on budget matters and discussion issues. It would have been at those meetings that we would have made those requests.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I just want to say that when this was brought to my attention, I vigorously objected to the comment that this was for 208. I said, no, they were talking about 209, and they were talking about, they caught it in time before we got into budget discussions. I had absolutely no idea that we were talking about 208. I'm embarrassed about that. But to sit here and listen that $400,000 mistake in the budget is not brought to the attention of this council, I think is unacceptable. And and now we're talking about a deficit for this year and trying to deplete it from reserves. I think this is an extremely serious matter, and I wonder what else is going on.
We have Councillor Ioannoni that wishes to speak.
I don't even know where to start with that one. Janice wrote a letter to the editor in regards to Gardner Road, Grassy Brook, and I'm just going to say, while I like the policy of updating us more frequently, I'm going to say this. When they knew there was a $400,000 shortfall of what they thought they would get, we need to know then. I don't care who our CAO is. We govern our CAO. So I really think we're berating the wrong people around this table. The chance to berate is over because he's no longer here. But I will say, I'd like to see a policy that says when you have an $11 million shortfall in development charges, don't tell me in 6 months. Tell me now. If you have a $400,000 shortfall, tell me now. Don't tell the CAO, and the CAO tells you. Don't tell them now. Tell us now. I mean, and the only comment that bothered me through that was in September, staff was told to stop all unnecessary spending. Well, that should be common all the time. We shouldn't be spending unnecessarily. So I find that kind of an oxymoron. But I will say, I think and we've said this verbatim, we're out of the loop about so much. I want to see it be different. And I think we have a chance to have that, a different reporting pattern, a different corporate mindset, a different, a better go forward chance we have now looking for a new CAO. But I really think we're berating the wrong people, and I'd really like to see this policy say if the shortfalls are then, if you get a shortfall on Wednesday in a senior staff meeting, council wants to know the following council meeting. I don't want to know 6 months from now. Because then we're berating staff, and then we're trying to defend staff, and you know what? It's become a vicious circle. Tell us when it happens. Don't let us play catch up 6 months later. And that goes back to give us all the information, not just the information you want us to have. That's what I want to see us have.
Yeah, when Councillor Ioannoni and I just learned in April about the $11.2 million in development charges that was expected to come in and wasn't there, and staff found out last fall just as we were entering budget discussions. We were pretty flabbergasted, and we've been wondering ever since what else is going on, and you know, now we have it. This $400,000 shortfall. What I would like to know is the recommendation before us that we have this additional quarterly and semi-annual financial reporting. Is that going to give us what we've been asking for since April, that whenever there is a variation from planned expenditures or a variation from anticipated revenue streams, we will be told forthwith? Because we've been asking and asking for that, and that's what we want is, you know, if staff knows about it, please tell us. And yeah, I'd love to know who decided that there was no need to approach the council and why they thought there was no need to approach the council, but I really think the horse is gone. So will this answer that what we've been asking for? When variations are discovered, we're told immediately.
Perhaps let staff respond.
Through the chair, we do have more comments on the report. I think it is important that we do allow Mr. Harrison to continue with his presentation. To answer your question directly, we'd be glad to make the frequency as often as you would prefer. We can also enter into some kind of a understanding that when there is a large variance or a significant variance in planned either revenues or expenditures, we bring that to your attention immediately. We can work that into whatever formal process you would like. Mr. Harrison does have more comments, though.
Councillor Fisher.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When you say 400,000 and we got in 650 and there's a wash, no, we lost. We lost 400,000. Just because you get more money doesn't mean you balance. If I would have calculated that, we should have 4 plus, not wash. And I'm really concerned, and so are the taxpayers, of the not transparency. What else is missing? Who did what? When was it done? And why was it done? So I'm going to make a motion. And I hope that council will listen to this motion. It's going to be very quick and very simple. That we have a forensic audit of this city, of this building, and it be conducted very soon. I want to know what's missing, who said, why, where, and what. I want a forensic audit here in City Hall.
I'll second that.
Thank you.
Councillor Fisher, I mean, I will take the motion and second by Councillor Ioannoni. But, I mean, just to be clear, there was no misappropriation of funds. There was an incorrect number that was put into it.
Say that. I just want to know.
You said what was missing.
Well, what is there? Is there more missing? Is there something else? We're all feeling there is. The taxpayers out there, they're thinking what else is wrong. Just to clarify the error, just to clarify it for me and the taxpayers, I would like this done. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, just to that point. And just to that point, I'd second that because I think in isolation, you think it's just an anomaly. Get that word out, an anomaly. With what we went through to get information for Gardner Road and Grassy Brook, I'm telling you it's not an anomaly. And I don't expect that our staff did anything illegal. But I think we would really be surprised to see, it's kind of like in your personal finances when you borrow from Peter to pay Paul, or you're borrowing from your borrowing to pay for your borrowing. We're not being told. I mean, clearly, you've got 2 glaring instances here. That's why I supported that. We wanted it back then, and I really think in the effort of open, transparent, and accountable, we can either walk the walk or sit down and shut up about it. And I really think this is something we need to do.
I'd like to
Okay, I have Councillor Carrio and then Councillor Thompson, please.
Do we not get audited financial statements from our auditor? Does anybody know what a forensic audit of the municipality of Niagara Falls might cost? Could anybody answer that? And could the mover and the seconder please give me the terms of reference that they would require for a forensic audit? Because I think there's many kinds of forensic audits. I'd like to know what the terms of reference are, what they want, what they're trying to do. And if they want our accounting firm to come back, maybe with staff. If not, if you don't trust the accounting firm that we have, if you think that they're not doing their job properly, maybe then we should be looking for a new accountant rather than doing a forensic audit. But I'd like to have my questions answered as far as what are the terms of reference for a forensic audit, if that's what this council is going to vote on, and what would the cost be of such an audit? And then the other comment I had was, I don't look at this as being a mistake by staff. I don't think they made a mistake. The only mistake they might have made was, I think they should have told us sooner. And I think from now on they will tell us sooner. But I think the mistake was made maybe back when we negotiated the deal with the casino. Maybe we should have got them to pay us more money during the course of the contract rather than $400,000 short in the last couple of months of the deal.
Okay, let's see if I can get some answers to your questions, Councillor Terrio, and I have Councillor Thompson that wishes to speak. Does staff have any idea what a forensic audit would cost?
I have had some experience with forensic audit of an estate. This is going back quite a while, longer than I'd like to admit. In any event, the one thing I can assure the council is forensic audits are very expensive things. And it should, we have to be, I would recommend that council get an estimate as to what the auditor would charge prior to committing to undertaking that action. I'm thinking we're looking at somewhere in the neighborhood of $100,000 to do municipality, councillor. Certainly the estate that I was involved in, which is 20 years ago now, it's a relatively modest estate in the neighborhood of $200,000 that had to be traced down to see if we could trace it. One of the executors had absconded with some of the money, and that cost us in the neighborhood of $45,000 in accounting fees to get sufficient detail to be able to go forward with our case in court to prove that the executor was the person that actually had the money. So I'd be thinking it would be somewhere in that neighborhood, and so I'd recommend to council that they have that we canvass some people with this experience to find out what their anticipated fees would be before council commits itself to that course of action.
Is that sufficient, Councillor Terrio? Would you still like an answer on your terms of reference?
I like the cost before we vote on deciding to just do a forensic audit. I like to know the cost.
Okay, in that case then, I have Councillor Thompson and Councillor Ioannoni that wish to speak.
Yeah, every time I hear the word forensic audit, I think it sends out maybe the wrong message. Do I think that anybody has done anything that would be illegal or whatever? That never entered my mind. I just think that we're talking about information here and control of the budget that this council has said that it wants to have in the past, and I don't think we've been able to do that. And I think one of the problems is and I'd like to see a report, and I hope the council would look into the fact that we have to examine the spending authority of the CAO and some of the other senior staff. It came up here a little while ago where the CAO had authority for $100,000. How many times in a week could he have authority to spend up to $100,000? I think that's excessive. I think that the council should be aware that somebody has that kind of authority, exactly what the spending is happening. And I think the other ones have 50,000. Is that accurate? 50,000, which, pardon me?
The executive directors have 50,000.
Yeah. So I think we have to be more mindful of that and more informed. And I think that 100,000 is excessive, and I think we should be having a good look at that if you want to control the spending and know what's going on with the budget.
Thank you. I have Mr. Iafrida on that point, and then Councillor Ioannoni.
Just with regard to the spending authority of the executive directors and CAOs, they spend what has already been in the budget. So it's not like it's a new expenditure of up to $100,000. It has to be a budgeted expenditure that council's approved.
Yeah, it has to be in the budget, but globally over the budget, there's all kinds of changes that can be made and are done on a regular basis. It doesn't have to be a line item. There can be all kinds of spending take place as long as it's in the global budget. I still think it's a concern.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was glad to say I voted against that. I thought giving somebody the authority to sign for $100,000 was far too excessive. I will say that through the whole Garner-Grassy Brook fiasco, and it was nothing less than a fiasco, when we start getting 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different answers in the same span of time, it gets concerning. I mean, the numbers changed all the time. As a matter of fact, I remember the first night we found out that money was debentured, borrowed, taken from another account, whatever you want to call it, that was thrown out here at the end. going out afterwards and a council member saying to me, until staff told us that night, we didn't know. So you've got staff borrowing to cover development charges from a convention center fund that we didn't know that money was coming out of the convention center fund until you ask the specific question. It's what we don't ask, and if you don't know to ask it, I'd like to see what accounts are we borrowing from? Who gave the authority to borrow from those accounts? Because I know the vote didn't come around this table to vote to borrow money from the convention center account. I didn't even know we were using it to offset our budget. And I know everybody around the table didn't, because we talked about it when we went out afterwards. So those are things I think that are important that we know. There's no stupid question for us to ask spending taxpayers' money. What I would like to see is Councillor Fisher amend her motion to say, can you please come back and tell us the cost of a forensic audit, as opposed to voting for it now. But I would say, I bet you that's the best $100,000 we've spent in a long time, and it can offset the loose leaf collection that we may cancel to save the $100,000. Best money I think we'd have spent.
Okay,
No problem.
Councillor Diodati,
I will change it.
Mayor Salsi, and Councillor Mace.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm in agreement with Councillor Carrio's comments. I know, first of all, there's no money missing. We know exactly what happened. It was, if anything, it was a staff error in judgment by not bringing it to our attention, and absolutely without a question, that cannot be ever tolerated. But in terms of them doing something wrong or misappropriating or doing anything against the rules, I don't see any issue. And for my money, that's a lot of money to spend without cause. If we had something specific that we were looking for, if we had something specific that was missing, I mean, staff has been creative trying to pay the bills and get the services at the same time. I mean, we give them certain leeway here in council. We've always approved senior spending limits, and we've always had comparators with other communities. I'm very comfortable with those, and we unanimously approve those. And in terms of the audit, yeah, I'm fine. That's fine. We'll get a cost for it, but I don't support it unless we've got cause for something to this effect. Thank you.
Thank you. Mayor Salsi, Councillor Mace.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I certainly concur with Councillor Carrio and Councillor Diodati. Obviously, if people are aware of what the cost of an audit would be in terms of forensic audit, we do have audited statements each year, and this council approves those audited statements. We're provided with a copy, and we have a presentation by our auditors, and we approve of those each year. So I think that would be a total waste, and I'm wondering if the councillor is really understanding the point when she makes the comment about a forensic audit. I'm not sure what she's looking for, but as I said, each audit would be subsequently pick up information, and to that point, last year we did an audited statement. It gives a financial observation of our statement of affairs, and I think that Councillor Carrio and Councillor Diodati have put it very well. More importantly, I think when I asked the question when I was informed just in between the meeting cycle, a week before, I think we discussed it here at Council, I had the discussion with Mr. Burden, and at the same vein, he told me, I said, why didn't this come to our attention before? He said, well, we did have the offsetting $650,000, offsetting a $400,000 estimate of revenues, but we had this new revenue that we found. So we didn't spend the money. The money now, we're talking about a deficit. We haven't let Mr. Harrison finish his presentation, but I think we'll see the challenges that we had were in fuel costs, which were uncontrollable this year in terms of diesel costs and fuel that went through the roof. And I think we should let Mr. Harrison complete his financial observations. So this council has had the opportunity in the past to vote on the requirements of or the consent for the CAO spending limits, and obviously, as the clerk just alluded, those matters are always budgeted issues, and they're dealt with by senior staff, and they don't exceed their limits. So I feel very comfortable in that there has not been a breach of that policy, and I don't think there's an accusation that there was. So in respect to that, I think a forensic audit is just a waste of time, and certainly a waste of taxpayers' money. I think that I'm not sure what they're looking for, but each year we have an audit done by a very credited firm that's been doing this work for a good number of years, and I can't see any reason to support that.
Thank you. Councillor Mace and then Councillor Wing.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I too am anxious to hear Mr. Harrison's budget. I think we've been waiting all night to hear it, really. Secondly, just to put it bluntly, I'm opposed to a forensic audit. I don't think there's any improprieties here to worry about. The one thing I am concerned about, though, is when we talk about this $400,000, we didn't lose it. We just weren't going to get it anyway. So I don't think there's any big issue there. It's just a matter of wrong figure put in the budget, and these things happen in business. When we started this casino negotiations, what year was that? When did the casino first come into town? Can someone, 96? So we signed our contract when? In 2000? So our contract started in 2000. Did we get paid for 96 and 2000? We got zero? So actually we got no money, and it's 2.6, and so that's 4 years. That's over $10 million we missed out on through negotiating. And was that the council of the day that negotiated that, or how did that come about? It was someone here still there?
Dean, you want to comment? Wait, no comment.
I'd like to know what happened there, because I think we're looking at 400,000. Maybe we should be looking back and saying, where'd the 10 million go? If I could hear,
Well, I've been looking for the 10 million too that they were supposed to get from the casino on an annual basis. We were tied right in to what the Windsor was going to get. We were told from day one that's what we were going to get, and it was a timeline that we were trying to get more money. In fact, we did get more money, which Windsor didn't get. We got up to $3 million eventually, but when the agreement was signed, that's when it kicked in.
that kind of pales comparison to 400,000. 400,000 looked kind of meager compared to what went on then. And anyway, I think the thing is, I think we should just continue on with Mr. Harrison's proposal, see what's going on, and let's carry on from there. Thank you.
Yeah, you know, I don't know how many times I have to say that. He missed the whole point of the whole exercise. The council wants to be informed. We're not talking about $400,000. We're talking about this council being informed so that we can run the city to be responsible to the taxpayers, and $400,000 is not insignificant. Whether it was a mistake or what it was, we should have been told.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wing.
Yeah, I agree. The council wants to be informed, and as I mentioned earlier, since Councillor Iannone and I started talking with staff back in April about the development charges, we've been wondering what else is going on. You know, the auditors who do our audit our statements yearly, they have a disclaimer at the beginning that says the audit's based on the information provided them by management. You know, so we've been relying on that same management to provide us complete and accurate information, and you know, I'm really wondering about some of this stuff sometime. The other thing is with that development charge situation, I was really left with more questions than ever got answered. At a meeting in April with Alderman or Councillor Iannone and Mr. Burden told us that in early 2008, that $11.2 million was taken from a short-term revolving line of credit. And then in July, at a meeting where Councillor Fisher was there along with myself, he said, "I've since learned that was not the case." And I've never quite figured out, well, how did you not know when the period you were talking about in early 2008 you were our treasurer? So, I mean, all along I've just had more questions coming up all the time. And I guess I want to get the figures. I don't want to I hate having to go to this expenditure. I'm thinking, though, it might be necessary. But I would like to ask the questions right now to Mr. Burden. Who decided there was no need to approach council about the 11.2 in development charges that weren't there when we expected it? And who decided not to approach council about when it was realized that the 400,000 that we were anticipating in casino payment in lieu wasn't coming in? And why did they think there was no need to approach the council? Whose decision, and why did they believe that was the case, that there was no need to tell us?
See if Mr. Burden can answer.
Through the chair, the ultimate decision-making authority is the CAO. He relies on his senior staff to advise him on the necessary information, to investigate his questions, to try and provide all of the relevant information that he needs to make a decision. Ultimately, it's the CAO's decision to either inform the council by whichever means he chooses, but in large part, these decisions are made by senior staff. And every one of the senior staff would attest to the point that when we bring information to the council, we believe it's the best information that we have. It's the complete information that we have. If after the fact we have found, and such is the case tonight, that we have better information, that we need to be more timely in our process in providing information, we would be the first, as we are tonight, bringing to you the fact that we do need regular reporting of financial results. Going back to the development charges, that was a long, ongoing process. There were many discussions here in council. There were many times that senior staff investigated and pulled reports together for the questions that were raised by council. There was a third question, I'm sorry. The last question.
My questions were the same thing for both the development charges, the 11.2 million, and the 400,000 in the casino payment in lieu. My question for both is the same. Who decided that there was no need to approach council, and why did they believe there was no need to approach council?
On the why part, I do recall that on the 400,000 for the OLGC money, that was a case where we believed that the 650,000 was an offset to this error in the budget. And because of the offsetting nature, and because we were only halfway through the year, the CAO and the senior staff agreed that it was not as critical as we originally thought. On the 11 point some odd million for the development charges, again, it was felt that we could continue to support those programs by using short-term funding, which we are doing today. It comes from a variety of forms. It's basically cash flow management. We've gone through that exercise with you. We'd be glad to do that again.
Mr. Chairman, that still doesn't answer my question. Who decided?
I think he did give you your answer on that. Okay, are there any other questions before I call the motion so that Mr. Harrison can get back to his presentation? The motion on the floor is that the cost of a forensic audit be investigated. Okay, since everyone's had the opportunity to make their comments, I'd like to make my comments. The way I see it is there's basically two issues here. One is reporting to council, and I think that everyone around this table is definitely upset at the fact that staff did not come back to us sooner. I think that people are upset and they're disappointed and their concerns are valid. The other side of it is that there was a mistake in a line budget, and in my interpretation, I mean, there was no misappropriation that happened. No funds are actually missing. Staff have acknowledged the fact that it was an error, and that this isn't an actual trend that we've been seeing. And because of that, I mean, I will vote against this motion. So, Councillor Fisher.
Very quickly. When this hits the paper, the taxpayer really has a lot to say. And so do I as a councillor for the taxpayer. And that's why I'm looking for the audit that I've requested, but I definitely would like to know the cost. Thank you very much.
Mayor Sells.
Mr. Chairman, I think you've summed it up very well, and I think that if you understand the idea and the concept, it's very clear. There are people who obviously were taking advantage of an error that you suggested was a pencil error, and I appreciate that. Reporting to us a $650,000 surplus could have happened the same way, and we hadn't heard that until more recently as well. So I don't have a problem with that issue and that explanation. I understand what staff has said to us. On the matter of the transfer of funds and with internal matters of borrowing, this council, first of all, whether they, this has been explained on a number of occasions by staff, and then this matter has been dealt with, but this council has complete control, and not one individual runs the decisions, as you're well aware. The council entertains information from staff, and we make a decision as a democracy around these tables that we sit behind right now. And you're well aware, as chair of the budget, that matters are conducted in a very thorough and proper way. And I think that council does have a handle on these matters. Obviously, nobody likes to hear misinformation, and that's the case. And I think we've had a satisfactory explanation explained to us. And I don't think there's any reason to lose our heads and our sanity with respect to what the explanation has been. I accept it, and I think you do, and others around this table have accepted it as well. So I appreciate your clarification.
Councillor Inoue.
Thank you. Just to speak to that, it wasn't a line item mistake. They really thought they were getting $3 million. He said he called OLG to say, why isn't it $3 million? And they said, we read it wrong. The agreement's been there for 8 years. There's no did you read it? Or did you just think it was there? I mean, come on. You've got a signed agreement that our former CEO participated in. The same agreement's been on the books for how long? I think it goes past a line item mistake, quite frankly. And you know what? That's my opinion. I'll vote the way I vote. The discouragement I've had in the reporting of financial dollars to this council since we started talking about Garner Grassy Brook is beyond belief. And you know what? You win a vote, you lose a vote. And I'm going to support asking for the cost for an audit.
Mr. Arafita, that was just a comment.
Just to comment on the agreements, I've heard this a couple of times this week or in the past week when this issue came up, like, oh, the agreement's right there. The agreements are in a vault in the clerk's department, and especially with regard to the agreements with the casino, they're voluminous. So, you know, Mr. Burden wouldn't have it on his desk to just look around and take a look, and I understand and appreciate that. You know, you'd think, okay, wait a minute, has the 10 years elapsed where we're switching over to the $3 million? Yes, in retrospect, we should have looked at the agreement to just verify that, but it's not like the agreement is right at somebody's fingertips. It would take them a while to go and look it up.
Okay, there is a motion on the floor that the cost of a forensic audit. I don't know that. There is a motion on the floor that the cost of a forensic audit be investigated. I'll call the motion. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Mr. Harrison, would you like to continue?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I think I'll just continue on. We had some other areas where we saw user fees decline this year. Transit was one area where we lost our major customer. We saw both the diesel fuel decline and the garage user fees. There was a decline in that area. We had the cancellation policy for the arena ice that has an impact, and you dealt with in community services earlier. And we also had a decline in the planning fees. We have undertaken a study on the development application processing fees for both building department and for the planning fees. And we had anticipated that the fee increases that were necessary would be coming forth earlier in the year, and it didn't materialize. And so we had put that in the budget, and so as an estimate, and that didn't come in. We have some other areas. So this is a natural thing that on the course of a year you have some areas that the revenues are greater than what you project. There's opportunities when revenues are less than what you project. And we have some other items in areas, the BIAs, for instance. These are areas where we have revenues that we don't budget for, that we have a matching and offsetting expense. So basically these costs go to, or these revenues go to inflate your gross revenues, but then they also inflate your expenses. So as I mentioned, the BIAs is one area. The people mover, fire code violation, tax sales, tax registration, weeds and bylaws, all of these areas we show revenues in excess of what we budget, and we also have an offsetting expense. This year we show a revenue in the building department for the Section 37 funding, which, as you know, is then totally turned around to be a transfer to reserves to be used at the discretion of council. Lastly, this year we had expenses for downtown events that came to council and were approved, and the offsetting revenue to that is the use of the CIP grants. So when all said is done, and we have the revenue increases, we have the revenue decreases, we expect that there'll be a modest increase in net revenue, which is less than what we've done in the past, where we've had significant rate increases due primarily to supplemental tax increases. On the expenditure side, once again, we see that there's areas where we have some increases, and we see areas where we haven't spent money. And in many areas, we're waiting to see what happens for the remainder of the year. What's driving our increase in cost this year is on the labor side. As you know, we entered into a negotiated settlement this year with both our fire and with our CUPE membership. And the fire membership was for a contract that was 3 years old that went to arbitration. And we had to pay out also the impacted retroactive pay. And as you can understand, it was an estimate that we put together, and unfortunately, the negotiated settlements were a little bit more expensive than what we had anticipated. We also have an issue in labor of OT costs, and the OT costs. What we're seeing is it's related to, particularly in the fire division, it's related to hiring staff for replacing retirees. And then certainly the last area is in retirements. We have retirements this year that are greater than what we anticipated and what we had a budget for. There's some other areas that we saw higher than expected expenses. Insurance claims are ahead of what we budgeted, and we still have a month to go. The Ministry of Labor has been in, and they've done a province-wide review of municipalities. This has resulted in some increased expenses for the corporation, higher training costs. It resulted in some asbestos abatement work and some asbestos abatement work, and also asbestos. We have to do a review of all our buildings for that as well. As it was alluded to earlier, we've had higher diesel fuel as prices have spiked greater than 35%, greater than what we had budgeted. And we're seeing that now, even with oil prices declining. Diesel stays high, artificially high, I might add, and impacts transit. It impacts the other fleets that use diesel fuel. And it also impacts areas where petroleum is used as a product, and that would be in areas like asphalt paving. We have seen an offset in expenditures where we've seen a savings. Staff complements have been delayed or set back in both, in some areas. Finance is one area, and in IS. We did not issue any debt this year, so we did not incur any of the planned expenses. Mr. Burden talked about one of the areas is that are in cash flow management, which is an important element of the finance division. We reduced our interest expense by effectively managing cash flow. We also had some delays in the recreation area and the pools area. We were able to defer for a year the painting of the pools. When we had originally budgeted to do it, we realized that we did not need to do that. On the one hand, we lost customers on the transit side, and we saw that there was a decline in the sales and in sales and in revenues. We also saw the savings on the diesel side, so we didn't have to spend as much as we had budgeted. So when we come to the end of the third quarter, we recognize that there's a lot of actions that need to be complete for the year. As Mr. Burden has indicated, staff were told verbally that they would authorize only essential spending. And what that means is not that it's unnecessary spending, because in the budget there is no unnecessary spending, but what we had asked, and all our senior staff, and they've participated in, is to defer any expenses that could be put off for next year and be considered part of the 2009 budget. Our next step is to go through, complete our year-end, because our year-end has a significant amount of work that has to be done. And at that time, we'll have a better handle on what the exact financial results are for the corporation. At that time, we would come back to council and provide either that we generated a surplus, or that in the option we'd have to consider transfers from reserves or a reduction in unused capital to offset any deficiencies or overspending that we may have incurred. I'm encouraged to hear the discussion that went on in the fact that we want to provide better information to council. This report and these types of reporting is an attempt, Mr. Chairman, to provide council with that information. And certainly I'm open to any questions that anyone has.
Councillor Ioannoni.
Thank you. Just on a comment Councillor Thompson made earlier, you've had deputations from Niagara Falls Public Library, GNGH Foundation, Niagara Falls Board of Museums. For the people that were here, and I wasn't here, I was at the health conference at that meeting. For those that were just referred to budget, that doesn't guarantee those agencies that money. That guarantees it will go into the budget for us to discuss. I think we need to, I mean, everybody's tightening their belts. We need to give these agencies notice that, you know what, we're going to tighten our belts too. Don't necessarily pen your budget thinking you're going to get approved everything you came to us for. Other than the library, which is a city service, and I can't see us in an economic time cutting the library. I mean, that's where families are going to go, and they're going to take their kids there for $2 for a program. But for the agencies that aren't ours, we need to send them a clear message now. Not only do you have to tighten your belts, we have to tighten our belts. And maybe everything you've asked for you won't get. Because while we vote on it at budget time, you know, pretty well, I sit on a lot of those boards, as do a lot of us, they really believe that's the money that they're going to get. So maybe let them know, you know, it might not always come through. And maybe this is the budget that we have to take a tighter look. There's a couple on here that I think we really need to take a tighter look on. And when we get through the expenditures, I have some questions that I'd like answered from a number of the agencies.
Would you like to make a motion that a letter be sent to these organizations?
Actually, I would. You know, we're going to tighten. Just don't, you know, we don't want you disappointed. We talked about this downstairs in regards to the arena and letting them know that we're going to charge them for unused ice time. And they needed a letter. I think we should be doing the same when we're talking about our budget. I think this is going to be the toughest budget the 9 of us are going to vote on, and we're going to have to cut back. I mean, there's no doubt. Watching CTV before I came here, you've got even our federal finance minister telling us, you know, you're in a recession, tighten your belts. Well, we need to let them know too, so it's not a shock when we pass a budget.
Okay, do I have a seconder to the motion that a letter be sent out to organizations?
Yeah, personally, I think it's just a notice. Wouldn't it have been nice if we had to send it out 4 months ago like we used to do, and everybody knew, and you could tell because all the budgets came in, all the budget requests came in at 0. Now you can tell them maybe it's not going to happen. I'll second the motion.
Okay, there's a motion on the floor that that letter be sent to organizations that made a deputation to council. Councilor.
I just want to declare my conflict on the Board of Museums. I'm okay on the rest of them. And also, I should remind council that the Niagara District Airport isn't a grant, it's a levy.
So noted. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you. Okay, there is still the recommendation for the report of the 2008 financial update. Staff is recommending that they come back to council more often. I believe it's general purposes to actual report quarterly, a water budget to actual report quarterly, and also a capital projects report semi-annually. Moved by Councillor Carrier, seconded by Councillor Fisher. Any questions or comments to that? Councillor Ioannoni.
I just want to be sure that Mr. Burden's comment on any significant shortfall anywhere, such as the 400,000, the 11 million development charge, those type of things come to, he said, you know what, we'll bring it now. If that's what you want, we'll bring it now. And I think we need to let our next CAO know. We don't want to know after. We want to know. That's not really, the actuals are reporting here, but if there's shortfalls, I liked his comment.
It would
we'll
also
amend
be
that.
good to define what significant is, because your interpretation and my interpretation of significant might be different.
I agree, and they are totally different, but it doesn't matter what yours is or what mine is. It's just simply giving us all the information when staff has it, not when they think we should have it. Thank you.
In that, to you, Mr. Chairman, I would like to know what significant means, because we deal every day with significant items. that may not be significant in the eyes of council. So it would be better for us if we have some direction as to what significant means so that we can report back to council in a timely manner.
I have Councillor Maves that wishes to speak.
No, I would just, I think in his presentation, Mr. Harrison mentioned he'd rather do it 6 months. Was there a reason for that?
Just for the capital projects.
The capital budget was, through the chair, the capital budget it has a number of projects that are ongoing. A lot of times the capital budget doesn't get approved till well into the year, and we're thinking that by a semi-annual reporting would be the best mechanism. We're looking at quarterly reports. Most upper-tier organizations, the provincial government, the federal government, provide quarterly reports. I'm not aware that a lot of municipalities do that, but we felt that quarterly reports on the operating results would provide you with timely information. But once again, as Mr. Burden has suggested, that we would provide you with updates on significant items. It's just we're looking for some clarity on as to what significant in the eyes of council would be.
Yeah, there is a motion on the floor to approve the recommendation, moved by Councillor Carrier, seconded by Councillor Fisher. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Thank you. Next item we have on the agenda is the budget presentation. I believe Mr. Harrison is going to go through the 2009 proposed expenditures. Sure.
This is the next presentation in relation to the budget. It's meant to be an overview for council's digestion, to understand some of the dilemmas that is facing senior staff as we prepare the budget. There's a number of factors that we're dealing with, and obviously the economic concerns that are out there. Everybody reads daily about that. I don't need to elaborate. One of the impacts that we have is the interest rate declines, because we do have investment income that we have on our reserve funds, and that poses a decline in some of the areas. We have increased fuel costs and price instability. Originally, when we started doing the budget back in August and early September, fuel prices were high. And since that time, they've declined significantly. Every day you hear a difference in opinion as to where fuel prices are going. When we talk in price variances of 10, 15, 20%, that has a significant impact on our budget, particularly in the transit area. And we have two dilemmas. We could use a higher number and inflate the budget, or we could use a lower number, and that increases our risk that we don't generate enough money and that we're under on our. So that's something that we're continuing to deal with. We've had an increase in utility costs. The utility costs continue to go up. We're also dealing with requests from boards and commissions. And then the last two items, as is noted, we have ongoing negotiations with our fire department. The contract ends this year, and we are under negotiations with our transit area as well. And both of those items pose, as we indicate, we have to estimate what we think that any increase would be. Moving to the next area, we see this chart is a breakdown of all of the expenditures by responsibility center. And we can see that when the overall city budget of last year's budget of just under $93 million, we can see that the biggest division is municipal works at 33% of that budget. It also includes things like the payments to the region for waste management, which form a large part of that. But it's all of the things that municipal works does. You can see the next largest division is the fire division, and then correspondingly through all of the areas to the smallest division, which is planning at 1.3%. The administration is held at 12%, and that includes all of our estimates on any payouts that we may need for our labor. So that would include all of the corporate services divisions, and then, of course, the payouts, as I said, for employee costs. So when we looked at the next thing, we come in at a spending increase of 4.91%, or $4.5 million. The next area, when we look at the rate increases percentage-wise, once again, these are in each of the areas. We can see that in the one area that is the largest is in the administrative services, and that is at 11%. We'll go through each of these areas, but it's interesting to note that building and bylaw is at 0%, while many of the other divisions are at higher than that. Certainly.
Yeah, sure. Councillor Ioannoni.
Thank you. Is your 4.91% or your 4.5 million both capital and operating?
Okay. The capital, as we've talked about previously, the capital budget is funded in part by transfers to capital from the operating budget. So the monies that we use to offset some of the funding requirements for the capital budget is included in this. The capital budget is by necessity a totally different budget, and that's there. What you would see as that would impact the tax rate is included in this budget. So as we look through, we can see many of these, and we'll go through all the driving forces in some of the areas. So if we go to the first area, which is city council, committees, boards, and services, we see that there are a number of areas that are had asked for an increase in request. We see the groups that are there. They at each level they've provided, each of them I should say, have provided a different level of assistance. And I mean, just to touch on something that came up in the previous discussion, we had followed the same procedure that we have done as long as I've been here. We had sent out letters to all of the agencies asking for them to submit their budget and their budget requests. Since I've been in the city of Niagara Falls, we've never asked them to submit a zero budget. What we've asked them to do is submit what their needs are. It's the requirement of the senior staff and council to look at the amounts that they request in conjunction with the other spending priorities that this council provides. So we did send out in right before September.
Just on that point?
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like he's trying to offset my comments, which I take exception to. You've been here for a period of time, and maybe you haven't been given any direction. When you get you tell somebody, we got problems, don't come in with anything unless it's a zero increase. That establishes what you're going to receive, and that's what we did. Now we have all of these increases, which we have to deal with, and they haven't been advised of that, and they think that that's an automatic. So my system works better than yours.
Appreciate that. I just wanted to make a point that we did send out the request to all of the agencies.
Thank you. I have a question about one of the increases, and that's the museum services, increase in museum services request. I can only see an increase in museum services request if we've had an increase in the use of our museum. So as I was going through what they submitted, I have questions that I'd like to know. Can I ask these directly to the museum, or do we go through senior staff? What I'd like from the museum, and it's not in here, is a breakout on how many people are visiting our museums annually. If we're servicing 10,000s of people, I understand them needing an increase. If we're servicing 800 people a year, I'm really going to question a $222,000 grant. So what I'd like to know is how many people are visiting our museums annually, and have them break it down month to month for our museums. Because I'd be interested to know if you had 10 come through the week. It's not in here. I did look for it. It's not in here. Maybe we're funding a museum that only gets 500 people a year. I'm sorry, what?
Just talking to Mr. Dulovic. He will get the information for you if you want to
Okay.
forward any questions.
Yeah, thank you. And I'd like them to provide some information about their education program, too. Okay? Thank you.
Mr. Harrison, please.
The next area is in administrative services, and we can see that it is 11.3% increase, or 1.26 million. The largest drivers of those are in the area of the estimated settlements that we would accrue for the fire and transit settlements. We also see that there is a cost that's new this year is for the People Mover project. We are seeing that the WSIB costs are increasing, and we are also, as I indicated, increasing our training costs related to the the Ministry of Labor. We also have seen that we've budgeted for an increased amount in the insurance claims because, as I indicated in our report on the actuals, we're seeing that the insurance claims are higher than we budgeted in 2008, so we've addressed that in the 2009 budget. The next area is the main factors driving increases in the fire division. As we talked about on the fire, there's negotiations ongoing. There are some staffing costs that are included in this that aren't related to rates paid. It's the progression of the staff through the system. As we indicated, there is some issues with regards to overtime that we're budgeting for, and these are directly related to the delay in hiring the probationary firefighters that were planned to start in the spring. And because there is a service level commitment that we have to have on each shift of the fire division, we are required to fill those with overtime. Moving on to the next area, we see in municipal works. One of the areas that we've increased the budget is in the forestry division, and we've increased it in both our fuel and operating costs, but also in some contracted services. There's also been an increase in the regional waste collection cost, and that's identified in that area. Moving to the next areas in our transportation services, and as you can see, it's a common theme. Fuel and utility costs are increasing. One item is Niagara Specialized Transit. We have indications from the region that they are looking for the municipalities to fund in the 2009 year some of the costs that are incurred for Niagara Specialty Transit, and that would be the city's portion. I know there's a report forthcoming from the Director of Transportation, but we believe that money has been put into the budget for this upcoming year. There has been a change in the delivery mechanism by which the region is asking for funding, which is new, and that's a new item.
Do you know what the cost of
It's $252,000 that we've included in the budget.
That would be an additional cost for the municipality to pick up?
That's the cost for the city of Niagara Falls. It's a prorated portion.
Yeah, through the chairman, this is something approved by council a number of years ago when it was first brought to council for approval by the region. It was approximately our costs were about $52,000 a year. What the region is looking at now, because of some issues with respect to funding we get for the province and how it's to be applied, they're looking for next year the cost to go up to about $255,000. So I mean that's a $200,000 increase in providing that specialized transit, and that specialized transit mostly has to deal with residents of Niagara Falls that are requiring medical services that are not offered here in Niagara Falls and having to go to St. Catharines to get those services.
Thank you. It's quite expensive.
We see in transportation there's also an additional cost of funding some equipment, and also there's the master plan that is expended in that area. In the Parks and Recreation and Culture area, we see there's a 1.8% increase planned, $270,000. Three areas basically are in the fuel and utility costs. We see in the cemeteries there's an increase expenditure for monument repairs, and in the athletic fields there is an increase for a purchase of a piece of equipment at the Kaler Park field. The next area is the business development division, increase of 9.86%, which relates to a well over $200,000 increase, and this relates to the increased request of Niagara Falls Tourism and the Downtown Association that has asked for $100,000 as well. So that is your high level, some of the issues that we're dealing with on the budget. To touch on some of the discussion, what's been done, divisional staff submitted the initial budgets back in September. Senior staff have been reviewing and meeting to look for savings. Two areas where senior staff have looked to is they reduced the transfers to capital to no growth under 1%, and eliminated many positions that are necessary. Staff are facing increased demand for service, which is required in a number of the divisions, the need for new people. But in light of the budget, we've senior staff, the two executive directors, have given direction to eliminate or defer many of these new positions. So moving on to the next slide, we see that to provide the expense budget by object code to kind of give an indication for council some of the limitations we have at dealing with the expenditure cuts if necessary. And we look at the labor cost component of the organization coming in at 46%. The next largest area that we see is in the materials area, which is all encompassing of all the things that we purchase that we directly consume, and that comes in at 15.7%. We see that contracted services is coming in at 11.3%, and as such, we go through all of the areas as we can see up there on the chart. Next, we move to the cost increases by object code, and we see how the cost increases are impacted on each of the object codes. And we see that labor costs, labor and employee benefit costs, are coming in at 3.9%. We see that the largest area is the contracted services area, and as we've identified, there has been some changes in the way we've structured some of those items. One of the biggest area is in the crossing guard area. We've transferred that expense from labor into a contracted service. Some of the other areas that are impacting that area, as we touched upon, is the regional waste increase, the regional transit for specialized transit are two big items that's driving that 16% increase. Next, we're looking at external transfers. That's the item we talked about, $480,000 increase, and certainly that's something we will look at through the budget deliberation. We see that internal transfers have increased by 10%. Internal transfers are the costs that the fleet services, and that's primarily the area, charges the other divisions for the use of vehicles and the repairs of those equipment, and that's really being driven by fuel costs. But there is an offsetting revenue in the budget for that, so that really nets out. But when you look at it, it is a 10% increase. In the financial expenses, we see that there has been some reductions from the previous year. The reduction is $308,000, and in the big area of that is the reduction in the debenture issuance cost. Also, there's a reduction in our interest cost on lines of credit because of, as I said, cash management. We also see that in the parking area, we reviewed it, and we saw a savings in 2008, which we have put in the budget for 2009, and it has to do with the payment of the GST on parking coin. And certainly there was a change in the transfer of the insurance in the transit area, which goes out of financial expense, which is really a contracted service. So those are the main items that we've gone through and seen. We move to the next step, and we can see that where we go from here, and we see that there's a few things together. Staff is putting together the budget binders, and we will deliver those budget binders at the December 15th meeting. That will give council an opportunity a month before we would deal with the next step of the budget, which would be in January 19th. We have on January 12th a capital budget information session. We'll be starting to talk about our process for the capital budget, and as we indicated, we will be doing a year-end report at the meeting on February 23rd. So that's the end of my presentation. Councilor, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Harrison, I called you today in regards to the $3.2 million we got from the province, the infrastructure dollars. So when I asked you, is this both capital and operating, I guess where I was going with that was, I can see the headline tomorrow, council needs to raise taxes 4.91%. Out of the $4.5 million, how much of that can be comprised of the $3.2 million the province gave us?
The amount is 3.9.
Okay, I'm sorry.
And that's the Investing in Ontario program.
Infrastructure dollars. So how much of that $4.5 million can we use the $3.9 million towards, if we choose to do so?
Yeah, it is a one-time funding source, which is related to the provincial government surplus, and it's set up now that any surpluses in the future would come down to it. But what you can use that money for is to fund capital projects, new capital projects, or existing projects that are not complete. You can't use it to fund projects that are completed that maybe there's not enough funding for. But you can use it for those two items. And so, as we indicated, I think back in September when the province had announced it, I believe they announced it at AMO, is that we would bring forth this as part of the capital budget deliberations as an opportunity for council to decide how they could use it. Now, in this budget, the area that you would use it, and it would only be a one-time item, is you could use that money to offset the transfers to capital. You could reduce the transfers to capital in 2009 by the $3.9 million. That would pose a problem for the future years, and as we've tried to indicate, we want to get into multi-year budgeting so that council is aware of the implications of doing such a thing. You would, in essence, defer that if you wanted to keep your capital program at the same level, you would have to make that money up in 2010. So, but that certainly, 3.9 can be used to reduce the transfers to capital in the 2009 budget.
So of this $4.5 million planned spending increase, how much of that is for new capital projects? Any? Am I misunderstanding you?
No, the capital funding transfers to capital provides, let's see here. The entire $3.9 million, because our capital program is greater than the $3.9 million.
So is the entire program within this $4.5 million? No. Do you know where I'm going with this?
Yes. What you have to, once again, this goes back to how the operating budget relates to the capital budget. The operating budget, in part of the $93 million that we spent in 2008, approximately 10% of that went to fund, in a series of ways, to the capital budgets. It's a transfer to capital or a transfer to reserves, which then may be used for capital projects. So if you say 10% of 93 million is approximately $9 million, then certainly if you wanted to reduce that $9.3 million down to by the 3.9, you could do that. The problem with doing that in 2009 is that in 2010 and 2011, if you keep the capital spending program at the same level, you're just deferring that for a year.
Councillor,
I hope that answered your question.
No, I do understand that better now.
Are you asking whether or not you can just deduct the 3.9 from the 4.5?
That's basically what I was asking. Yeah.
The short answer to that is yes.
Yes. Okay. Well, and I had broached this when we first found out we were getting the 3.9 million, and we hadn't hit the dire predictions that we have now. So I guess once capital when we're voting on what the actual increase is, we'll be able to debate the fact that maybe we don't have to do any because we can apply that 3.9. But the next question I had for Mr. Harrison, and I also discussed it today with him on the telephone, was the last term of council had voted to put the expenditure of the sale of properties, do you remember the sale of property across from the community center, in a pot for the downtown. When the new council was voted in, we then switched that, and that money is now sitting in a holding account. And we haven't designated that money for anything either. So my question to you today was, is that money still sitting untouched? And can we use the money from the sale of that property, per se, for a rainy day in a recession year where everybody's being hit left, right, and center to offset an increase? Because I see two pots of money that we can actually use without dinging the residents and hurting them even more than they're getting hurt right now. Can we do that with that money?
The money that was from the sale of that property has been put in a reserve account. It was provided in the reporting that we did on the reserves, and it's shown, I believe, it's $5.8 million. It's receiving interest because we haven't spent it, and it is at the discretion, like every decision, it's at the discretion of this council to use as you see fit. Certainly, we will be, certainly as staff, we will be looking at every opportunity to mitigate any spending increases and looking for opportunities to look at that. So it is up to, it is available.
Thank you.
Okay, I want to just defer over to Mr. Doolittle, who'd like to clarify something.
Councillor Iannone, just a little bit concerned that you're focusing in just on the expenditure side. And I know you were away at one presentation on revenues. We also have a challenge on the revenue side for 2009, where our revenues are going to be lower than in 2008. So you have to put the two together. So it's not just what you're seeing here tonight, the increase in expenditure. There's also a decrease in revenue that we're anticipating for 2009. So when you do get the budget binders on December 15th, you're going to see the two of them together. You're going to see that increase in expenditure, and you're also going to see that decrease in revenues from 08 to 09. When you put the two together, it's a much larger number to deal with, and what staff will be coming forward with. So based on the information we received to date from council, this is where we're at, and we are going to provide the various options that council can look at, including the 3.9, the 5, and possible expenditure cuts. But that's what we'll talk about at the next meeting. So you have to remember you've got to take into account the revenue side too. So applying the $3.9 million doesn't say all of a sudden, oh, now it's only a $600,000 problem. There's still that revenue issue that we talked about previously.
Thank you, Mr. Dulovic. And staff did email me those this afternoon. I haven't had a chance to go through them. But if I'm doing my numbers correctly, 3.9 from the province and 5.8 in an account where council put that money aside is 9.7. And I just briefly in my head tried to do the evening out. And if I'm doing it correctly, we don't have to hit people up for 4.5%. So I mean, I'm not saying that that's what we have to do, but I'm just trying to find in my mind where I can find a happy comparison, or where we may have, when in your own private household you save money for a rainy day. I look at that property money as money for a rainy day when council doesn't want to burden the tax. That's how I looked at it. But again, it goes to a vote of council.
Yeah, and just to follow up, as Mr. Harrison said, we know in 2000 for the 2010 budget we won't have the 3.9. And if we use the 5.8, or a good chunk of it, we won't have that for the 2010 budget. So therefore, then we're going to be sitting there, okay, what do we do now for 2010?
Okay, Mayor Salsu, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to say that I think Councillor Iannone certainly is asking the right questions. I know that we'll have an opportunity to debate these matters, and I think when we receive our budget binders, we'll have a chance to do that very likely through a line-by-line process or whatever the request might be from the members of council. I just want to confirm a few things. Mr. Harrison has pointed out the challenges, and we have yet to issue a challenge to staff in respect to our spending and to where we're going to go and what direction we go, whether it's cutting some of our capital projects and delaying them as we may have to do from time to time. As you know, these are unprecedented times, and we haven't seen the likes of this in our generation, certainly with the world economy, and let alone our own domestic economy, which is better than many because we haven't seen the substantial decreases that they've seen in other countries as quickly as it's happened in a matter of not necessarily months but weeks. So obviously this council will have to take into consideration certainly the atmosphere and the tone. Taxpayers have told us they can't afford to spend more money on taxes. They can't afford more imposition, and I can appreciate that. And we may have to adjust the figures accordingly. What we have today was a very general overview of what was, we just talked about with Mr. Harrison. I had the chance to talk to our acting CEO last week, and I was asking him to look and consider other avenues of revenues as well at other sources, and he has been pursuing some of those areas. So I'm sure Council will have the opportunity to get all the information by staff in the next few weeks, just after the holiday season. So I was hoping that along the lines of Councillor Iononi that we'd be looking and reviewing our capital costs and commitments, looking at what's happening not alone this year, but also the impact, as Mr. Dulvik, you pointed out, for the future as well. And I think we'll have an opportunity to do that in the upcoming budget deliberations.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other comments or questions by members of council for Mr. Harrison? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Harrison, for your presentation. Is there any new business for committee? Councilor Diodati.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was going to bring this up later on, but I might as well do it now. Let's find my note. Sorry. We're talking. Everybody's waiting for. Sorry about that. We're talking about creative approaches to revenue opportunities, and I did have some discussion with Mr. Holman about the ideas. And I just had an idea come to me, and I would just ask. I'm going to make a motion that staff maybe approach this. And it came to me. I noticed this summer as we're blowing out the lines of all the fire hydrants in the city. We've got over 3,000 of them, and we do them every year to blow up the sediment and whatnot, but that's all treated water. And I guess it accounts for about 1.5% of our unaccounted for, thank you, and unbilled water, part of the leakage and whatnot. So anyway, and I saw that we just wash it down the street more or less and back into the sewers or the catch basins or whatever. It just seems like kind of a waste. Maybe it's not drinkable because of the coloration, but it's still treated and it's safe water. And the idea is that staff, or the motion that I would make is that staff investigate the idea of selling that water to local water delivery company with the big tankers that come to fill up your retention ponds and your skating rinks and your pools and your things like that. And again, I don't know if there's an appetite for that type of private enterprise, but certainly it's a lateral way of approaching the water that we're just retreating. So I would make that motion through.
Looking for a report, seconded by Councillor Wing. Questions or comments to the motion? All those in favor? Opposed? Motion's carried. Is there any other new business? Okay, if not, we'll adjourn to our regular council meeting. Thank you.